Welcome to the Safeguarding Podcast. In each episode, we'll discuss a different safeguarding topic with a range of expert speakers. Please be aware some of this content is sensitive and listener discretion is advised.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Safeguarding Podcast. I'm Vicky Chafe, I'm Head of Community Relations. I have been joined by Tony. Tony, could you introduce yourself for me please?
Yeah, thanks Vicky. So I'm Tony Dunkerley and I'm the founder of Illustro Consultancy Limited, which is an international training, research support and educational service to prevent, identify and deal with modern slavery and human trafficking.
Thank you so much. And we've asked you here today to talk to us about the global issue of modern slavery. Yeah. So I think that's probably a really good place for us to start, if that's okay. So what does the term modern slavery encompass?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a good question. We're hearing it more and more, just in the general public. The awareness of this term is building, which is great. But when we ask, what does it actually mean? Sometimes people, struggle, and quite rightly. So when we think of the term slavery, we often think of the old chattel slavery, where people were taken from the Africas to the Americas in large numbers over many years and kept in chains. And at that time, and as abhorrent as that sounds to us now, that was through a legal mechanism where people could be legally owned. So slavery, what we think is really at the sort of far end of the continuum of slavery, of forced labour, of exploitation. So at the extreme end is slavery. And then there are many, many other parts of exploitation that form that as well. And what we do, we use the term modern slavery to encompass all these other different kinds of exploitation that we now recognise as still horrendous forms of exploitation, including slavery at the end. And these can include sexual exploitation, forced labour, servitude, criminal exploitation, and many, many other forms of exploitation on that continuum. So modern slavery is what we encompass of the extreme slavery as well as all the other forms of exploitation.
And do you think that when anybody who's involved in children or anybody who's involved in vulnerable adults, do you think that they are as clued up maybe as some of the other forms of abuse?
I think what will happen is for frontline practitioners, for safeguarding professionals, teachers, frontline with school-aged children, including parents, is that I think there'll be a general awareness of abuse that they will have heard of and the nature of that. So that might be probably child sexual abuse they'll have heard of. In some circumstances, unfortunately, there may have been some experience of that by a parent, a teacher, or otherwise, where they themselves as children have gone through that. But when we look at such things as human trafficking, where people are recruited or children specifically, in the context that you mentioned, Vicky, where they are coerced and groomed, targeted because they are children and are vulnerable by nature because of their age and lack of experience, then we don't often talk about that, or should I say awareness is not there at the same level for those frontline practitioners in schools and parents and family as to how children come to be in a point of exploitation, rather than just what we may think of either a child being locked in a room and abused, or someone who is a child who may be abducted, and those sort of historical types of ways in which children are abused are rapidly changing. So the way that they are recruited, the means by which, and the nature of the abuse has changed a lot through mostly technology and otherwise.
Absolutely. And as you said, that the guises in which these children are being targeted have changed so considerably and presumably will continue to change as well.
Oh, certainly. I think with the advancements of technology, we have, or children have, teenagers are now, by the age of 5, 6, 7, are more technologically au fait than you or I put together, Vicky.
Yeah.
And it's only by trying to keep up with it. And this is the impossible task for parents and everyone else, of a certain age and above. Um, the fact is that children now can talk to other people, strangers, on the other side of the world.
Hmm.
And that might seem like, because of the geographical location or distance, that the risks are minimal. And that's simply not true. The way that children can be coerced, groomed, trust be built online over a period of time. And then the child is often, as we see in many of the cases we sort of support train in, is that once that trust is built, that then these people will ask their children to send intimate pictures of themselves, and so on and so forth. So then that's when the trafficker, that's when the groomer has them. And they can say to them, look, unless you do X, Y, and Z, I will release these images, send them to your parents, to your school, to your friends. And the shame of that and the embarrassment and the, it's just absolutely a dreadful, awful experience for an adult to have gone through that, let alone a child. And this is what we're seeing. So when you say, will it change again? I think now the technology is here and is not going anywhere. I'd like to hope, and I know this is true, is that many companies are looking at AI and otherwise, online gaming softwares and such, to try and put in things in place that help not only detect but also prevent. But the reality is that people find their way around that, and that's how it works. So it will change for those that are trying to work on the prevention side of things, either the police, tech companies, so on and so forth. But the reality is that it will have to continue to adapt, because those who have a sexual preference to children or otherwise will find a way.
I mean, it's just so utterly frightening. And as an educator and as a parent as well, something that I've always been an advocate for is the fact that we can't protect our children 24/7. We can't be there, and there has to be some form of independence for them. So what's really important is that we give them the tools to safeguard themselves. Do you think that should be a focus as well?
Oh, Vicky, you take the words out of my mouth. It is. I mean, I'm not a parent, and I don't pretend to know what it's like to be a parent. Okay, but I know that when I was a kid, my mum told me not to talk to strangers. She told me not to go too far from the house where she couldn't see me. These kind of things. And I appreciate times change. I understand that. But the reality is that there is a way that strangers can now come into your house and into your child's bedroom through online means. And so parents, guardians, carers need to have an awareness as well, to raise, to make the children aware, but also to spot the signs of if there's something not quite right. But you're right, the children, let's look at prevention as the main thing here. How can we prevent it from happening? And that's letting the children, I use the term children under 18, they're not kids.
Yeah.
Whereas I do also advocate for the younger the better, for them to understand that their mind and body is their own, and they have autonomy over that, and they should feel comfortable in their personal surroundings and stuff like this. And this is what we do with some of our younger school workshops, because they don't understand what human trafficking is, but it's all about understanding where their boundaries are, even though as young people. But when they know what the dangers are, and they can see it happening, all right, then that's where they can actually put the brakes on and go, hang on a minute, I know because I've been taught, or my teacher told me, my sports coach told me, Vicky at the safeguarding company told me, Tony at Illustro told me that when someone who I don't know sends me a friend request on Facebook or Twitter or TikTok, or sends me a DM on whatever social media platform it might be, and I don't know them, that means I should not be sharing any of my personal information with them. I should not be sending them pictures. If I'm not comfortable with it, I should go and tell someone who I trust offline, who can then maybe take some formal action, be that contact police, block the person on the social media channel, report the person on the social media channel, and so on and so forth. So yeah, 100% letting the children know what the risks are, and then also really coming in with the parents as well to make sure that they understand that if that this happens, and for them, and again, I'm not a parent, but I would suggest the best way is to have a conversation, just to have a conversation with your child or children about this, and to make it a safe environment. It's a discussion around a dinner table or whatever it might be for that family, is just to talk about it. And so if your child has been approached, or your child is in a position where they have sent an intimate image, or however that might be, is that they should know that it's not their fault, and they shouldn't feel guilty or worried about the consequences that their parents might shout at them, or so on and so forth. They've got to have that safe environment to tell their story, to say what's happened. So it's really sort of an end-to-end approach, really. But yeah, I mean, I'd still suggest focusing on the kids first, i.e., prevention. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were talking about some of the signs and symptoms that we could be looking out for, what are the obviously there would be hundreds, and they would they come in different guises, but what would be the most common signs and symptoms that we could be looking out for?
Yeah, sure. So, and again, it'll depend on the individual. It'll depend on the nature of the exploitation, and so on. So, let's just list a few of the common ones in the UK, for example. Let's look at something like criminal exploitation. All right. So you'll hear a lot this term, the county lines, young, normally males, but girls as well, who are come from certain backgrounds where they feel that they're not part of a family structure, and they will be targeted, and at a young age, 13, 14, if not earlier, recruited into a gang, and then used to smuggle drugs across county lines. So that's generally what county lines. So look at the individual there. What are the signs that young boy or that young girl, how did it change for them? So that's one thing you could look at. So really, change of behaviours. So I'll try and focus in on those that are more common to several different kinds of forms of exploitation. So if your child is normally of a certain character, personality, loves life, can't wait to play with friends, always talks to you, is affectionate physically, emotionally, etc., you will know your child. A guardian will know their child, or whatever. And if the change of behavior starts, so they're not as talkative, they don't want to express feelings in the same way, or they might do extreme feelings, such as very angry. We see that a lot in young children, and change behaviors when they may suddenly, there's something happened. There may have been a sexual exploitation or otherwise, an abuse. But at the same time, they might have fallen out with their friends. So it could be there's an acute and a chronic change. If it's a couple of days of them having a normal teenage tantrum mood swing, that's one thing. But if we're talking in a continuum, change of behavior in school, they're suddenly getting into a lot of trouble. When they want to go out on a weekend, they're saying, I'm here, and they're actually here. Many things that teenagers do, okay? But it's about, again, talking to them and just seeing what the underlying issues are, whether it's just teenage hormones, or whether it's actually there's something else going on for them that they haven't, for one reason or another, felt comfortable to talk about. So that's at a sort of at a one level, and then you could look at human trafficking in the bigger sense. And again, I'll try and narrow it down as best as possible for example, the UK. So we hear about it where car washes and garages and things like this, where predominantly foreign nationals will be there, looking very dishevelled, look quite gaunt, as though they haven't eaten in a while. Every time you go there, it's the same 2 or 3 people working from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m. at night. It's these kind of indicators that someone's being exploited through forced labour in that context. And then, we could go wider and wider and wider to different kinds of things. But generally, those are the main indicators that you look at in terms of the first context I gave for children, their change of behaviours.
Thank you so much for that. That was really helpful. When you talk about maybe if you're concerned that there has been human trafficking that has happened, maybe you've gone and you've said that you've seen these signs and symptoms. Say if you've taken your car to a car wash, you've gone to go and have your nails done or something like that, and you are concerned that somebody has been a victim of human trafficking or modern slavery. What do you suggest that they do? Would it be to talk to that person, or would that put them in greater danger, or would you just report it? What would your advice be in that situation?
Yeah, really important question, Vicky. I think I would, but it's easy for me to say because I'm an ex-cop. So if I felt like that, I would call the police. I'm not talking 999, but I would probably do a 101. I think that's still the local number in the UK.
Yeah.
Sorry,
It is. Yeah.
And just say, look, this is. I've been to have my nails done. I've been to the car wash. I've heard about this thing called modern slavery. It might be nothing, but everything I've learnt about this, something is wrong. It just looks wrong. These people look exhausted. In the nail bar, it might be whatever the indicators are there that's aroused suspicion of anyone. So I would really advocate just to either anonymous on Crime Stoppers. If you're really not comfortable in calling the police directly, then that's fine. Crime Stoppers or just phone the police directly. The police want to know about this stuff. They really do. They want to try and stop it. And I know that from first-hand experience, and still the cops that we work with globally, they really are looking at this and trying to help. But they rely on members of the public. They really do. So if you see something, please do report it.
Absolutely, and it's much better to report it and it come back that there's nothing amiss going on here.
Done.
Exactly.
No harm done, isn't it? Yeah.
It's much better, and it's much better for your conscience as well.
Yeah.
So it's better to report it, like any safeguarding concern that you would have if it was about a child or even a vulnerable adult. This is exactly the same situation. It's much better to report something and nothing be amiss than not report it and something dreadful is happening.
Completely agree. Yeah.
What is the scale of this problem?
Right. So if you're looking globally, the latest figures in the global report are around 50 million people are held in modern slavery globally at any one point in 2021. So the report came out in 2022. Let's put that in context. So when slavery, the chattel slavery that I mentioned, 1800s, about 12 million people were recorded as being enslaved, taken from Africa to the Americas, recorded. 50 million, that's what we're looking at here, by absolute number. And these figures are based on some algebraic formulas that are used to predict dark figures from the figures that we know. So obviously different countries and jurisdictions supply a certain amount of figures as best we can. And then because it's quite it's a hidden in plain sight crime, but again, it's difficult sometimes to prove, convict, so on and so forth. And there's many things that are against us in identifying absolute correct data. However, people a lot smarter than me in terms of mathematics have done these figures, and that's there's the UN and otherwise that do these reports. So when you're looking at 50 million, that's broken down to around 22, 23, I think it is, million in forced labour. So forced labour, very briefly, Vicky, when we look at the international definitions, it's about threat of penalty or menace, and it has to be volunteer. So you have to voluntarily do the work, and if it's not voluntary, it's one of the two parts of forced labour. The second part is threat of penalty or penalty. So is someone threatening you or will harm you if you don't do the work? So that's how many people, 22, 23 million people are in that situation at any one point globally. It's horrendous. The other half, predominantly looking at forced marriage. Okay, so you're 20 million plus are held at any one point in 2021 in a situation of forced marriage, where they've been forced into and cannot leave for one reason or another that marriage. And that's quite striking to hear from people like you or I who've been raised in the UK or raised in the US or Europe or some parts of Europe and otherwise, is that's complete. It's a complete cognitive dissonance for us to get our heads around. Hang on a minute, that's so out of my thing. But the rest of the world, it's very, very different. Where these things are set, couples are, it's not for love, it's for money and so on and so forth, and a certain amount of a certain amount of dowry to the wife's family, and I picked one there, but there's many different ways in which this is done. So it's quite an alarming figure when you hear it like that. So that's globally, and then UK wise, the Q2 I think it was report for the UK. Was around 4,000 people have been identified in just Q2 in the UK. So by identified, first responders there's a mechanism in the UK called the National Referral Mechanism. Police, medical professionals, and a certain amount of NGOs and otherwise are designated first responders. So if they find a potential victim, they refer them into this system. It collects data, obviously, and this data is published quarterly. So 4,000, so that's the highest it's ever been since the NRM started in 2009. So we're on par for 12, 13, 14,000 being identified in the UK. And that's only identified. You've got to think about how many people we'll never ever hear about. So that's the sort of figures there. Again, it's broken down, I think around 60 to 70% of those are male, mostly within forced labour. When it's by age, then it's around 54%, I think it was, for adults. The rest are children, criminally exploited, children under 18, so it's 17 and below. And nationality, Albanians, Eritreans, and UK citizens, UK nationals. That's the top three. Now imagine how many countries there are in the world that we think, oh my goodness, imagine the figures there. Well, it's actually UK nationals, the top three within the UK being trafficked. Because traffic doesn't have to be across international borders. That's smuggling, that's people smuggling. Human trafficking can be external, cross international, but also within a border. So lots of UK nationals being criminally exploited around the country. So that's what it looks like at the moment, and we're just finding more and more and more. So whether that's actually there's not more, we're just being more. There's more awareness, more identification, so on and so forth. But we don't know, and that's reality. And I strongly would suggest that with the current global climate in terms of migration trends through conflict, climate change and a whole host of other issues that we have at the moment globally, and economically moving forward with a likely downturn in the next couple of years. That's just going to drive migration even more, and that will affect the amount of internationals that we find in the UK. But still, out the top three is UK nationals. So we have that problem here with our own nationals who are being exploited. So it's a big problem.
I mean, I'm just absolutely astounded with those figures. And you are quite right in what you say about how people automatically think that human trafficking means that they don't come from the UK. And I think that there will be many of our listeners that will be the same as me, and just astounded that such a small country in proportion to the whole world, we're in the top three.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just absolutely astounding.
Well, just to clarify, we're not in the top three by absolute number, but the UK nationals within the UK are one of the top three. Yeah. Some of the reports are quite surprising in terms of where you would put the UK internationally by absolute number. We were around 136,000 people, according to the Global Slavery Index, which came out 2018, that we had 136,000 by absolute number held in modern slavery in the UK at any one point. So it's very, very surprising to a lot of it, and still surprises me, and I've been involved in this for 10 years.
There are just no words. It's just unbelievable that this is going on, and it goes back to what we were saying about the fact that if you see something, just report it, whether you're right or you're not. That doesn't matter, because that number is astounding. And that funny feeling in your tummy that I always say whenever I'm talking about safeguarding, you always follow that, because it's there for a reason.
Yeah.
So absolutely. I mean, you may not be able to answer this next question, Tony, but is there a most common type of modern slavery in the UK or globally?
As in the nature of the exploitation?
Yeah.
Well, in the UK at the moment, statistics-wise, particularly with children, we're looking at criminal exploitation, so that's the county lines. Globally, again, looking at forced marriage, but sexual exploitation, particularly women, in terms of on and off street prostitution. We see a lot of, in the UK, Vietnamese in cannabis factories. So Vietnamese nationals will be brought over, and cannabis factories will be hidden all over the country. So you conduct raids in these places, and you've got huge cannabis grows, and these Vietnamese nationals have been locked in there with barely any food, and so on and so forth. So that's quite a big one that we find quite a lot. I suspect because it's quite high, it's harder to hide because of the extent and size of these places. But in all due respect to all the reports and everything else, I am convinced through the work that I do and see is that the real one is child sexual exploitation. Children do not know what abuse is. If they are being abused, particularly young kids, they don't know, so they don't report it. They don't know how to report it. They don't know who to report it to. They just trust the abuser, because what we do see, and the reports suggest, is that normally abuse is within a situation where the trust already exists with the child and the abuser. So that might be a parent, so interfamiliar, or a uncle, auntie, whatever it might be. And it's also teacher, sports coach, religious leader. These sort of things where the child has already developed this relationship of trust with them, or vice versa, and that's where abuse, can be. Now, with the advent of technology, and even more so now, as an indirect result of COVID, is that what it did was naturally upskill many more people on how to interact, engage with people online. So that in itself is not bad. That's a good thing. It allows you, particularly families that are, at other ends of the earth and so on and so forth. It's changed our working culture. It's changed many things, and many of those things will be for benefits. But like most things, there is also those who use technology or otherwise to advantage of them, and their agenda is not something that you or I or anyone else probably listening would advocate for. So for those who have a predisposition to children, can now use tech to get inside the door, the bedroom, and I think that's really something that I know in the work that I do, our online investigations that we do with police forces and so on in other countries, and this isn't even in the UK, this is many other countries, is that the amount of child sexual exploitation material, so videos, images, so on and so forth, that are being produced, stored, advertised through social media, and then disseminated or downloaded from all over the world, is just huge. So in answer to your question, I'm very much, it would take some convincing for me that it's the biggest one is not child sexual exploitation. Yeah.
Honestly, Tony, you've just absolutely astounded me with all of the information that you've given, and I can't thank you enough for coming on today and speaking to us and helping us to understand the gravitas of the issue that's at hand. Again, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, Tony, and the work that you're doing, how could they get in touch with you?
100%. So our website is www.illustroconsultancy.co.uk. Under the hashtag Let's Talk Modern Slavery for Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn as well. So please don't ever hesitate. Even if you've just got a question, we're more than happy to help. We focus in on doing a lot of school workshops. We do school workshops for free in the UK, Serbia, Nigeria, and we're just about to start in Kenya. So we're trying to get out to everyone we can. We do an hour's school workshop, online or in person, but we're also now doing parent workshops, and have a look at our social media for our next parent workshop coming up. We do them regularly, so we just want to help. We just want to raise awareness on this, and so if anyone has a question, we'd be more than happy to answer.
That's fantastic, and we'll make sure that we put all of your links in the show notes bio as well, so that you'll find all the information that you need in those. Thank you again, Tony, for coming on and speaking to us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Pleasure's mine, Vicky. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to the Safeguarding Podcast. For resources and more information about our safeguarding solutions, please visit thesafeguardingcompany.com. And don't forget, if you've enjoyed this episode, subscribe and feel free to rate us using whichever podcast provider you use.